Good evening, Congress. We are the Dragon Environmental Consultancy, and we would like to thank you for joining us in our presentation on drought severity, preparation, and mitigation. And we would like to begin with a dilemma. A dilemma in the fact that it is difficult to address drought in terms of who will absolutely be affected, what the severity of these effects will be, and how long they will persist. So in order to address this question, we are going to use past tendencies of climate and drought to project scenarios into the future. This first figure shows the relationship between climate cycles and drought cycles. And as you can see, the data is not very uniform, but there are two main things you need to pull from this graph. The first being, we are headed into one of the most severe droughts that we've seen last century, one that is already rivaling the Dust Bowl of the 1930s in some regions of the United States. And the second being that the severity of these drought cycles is gradually increasing over the last 40 years. Now, it's difficult for us to absolutely predict how long this current drought will persist, but these two graphs show the climate. These two graphs show a microscopic view of drought in recent history in the last decade. This first graph on the left, you need to notice the recent spike in the last 2 years of percentage of U.S. land under drought conditions, and also correlate this with the graph on the right, which shows thematically the regions of the United States that have been susceptible to droughts in the last decade, and use this to interpret that this problem will only persist in the future. And as we look into the immediate future, due to a recent and uncharacteristic precipitation event on the eastern coast, the heart of the issue lies solely in the American West and Southwest. And this area is important to us for two reasons. The first being it's very populous. There are roughly 60 to 70 million residents that will be directly impacted by this drought. And the second being that doesn't even account for the indirect fallout of potential crop failure. California alone houses about 2/3 of this population and a large portion of the arable land that I've discussed, and they have had recent turmoil this drought season.
California Governor Jerry Brown has declared a state of emergency due to the drought. News 10's Ashley Carrasco spoke to me to say this season could go down as the driest winter in history.
It's a profession. It's a life.
Jack Cowley, who prefers to be called Jack, has been farming for 50 years. He says this is probably the worst winter he's seen in Montague, California since 1976.
It's going to affect me more in the long run than it is this year, and yes, it will.
Jack breeds bulls and cows. He has a contract with Harris Ranch Beef and sells the company about 900 cows a year. Mr. Cowley owns 1,800 acres of land, and he says if he can't get enough moisture, it could ultimately affect his cattle production.
See, if these pastures are drought out, then I have to turn around and replant them and start all over again, and that just takes a couple of years to redevelop.
Ryan Sandler with the National Weather Service says this could be the driest winter in history for the West Coast. That's because the same high-pressure system has been lingering in the Pacific for more than a year. The system is acting like a wall, and storms are going around the air mass into Canada. Sandler says the cause is a mystery.
It's very unusual. We're all pretty confident that this just does not happen very often, but we don't know enough to say that it's directly linked to climate change.
CAL FIRE is already hiring its seasonal crew. First responders say there's no way to tell what the fire season will bring, but everyone needs to be prepared for the worst.
If they're burning their burn pile, make sure they have that extra clearance, make sure they have that water source. If they're towing a vehicle or towing a trailer, make sure that their chains aren't dragging that they're towing it from.
Covering your news, Ashley Carrasco, News 10.
So as we peer further into the future, the situation gets a little bit more bleak. This figure is taken from the IPCC Assessment Report 5, and according to their RCP 4.5, which is essentially a rather ambitious plan to stabilize emission rates, we will see the gap between evaporation and precipitation increase in the American West and Southwest, which will then lead to decreased runoff, soil moisture, and relative humidity. In general terms, this means there will be more water than there needs to be. To lead to this scenario, in which we have 1,200 counties in the continental United States that are experiencing at least moderate drought conditions, over 400 of which are experiencing extreme drought. So why this is important is because it's not fair to think of drought as, oh, it will happen, it's probably going to happen, we'll deal with it when it comes. Droughts are happening currently, they will persist, and we desperately need to address them. So we will now address why socially and economically the scale of this effect could be catastrophic.
Right. So in the face of an oncoming severe drought, the U.S. Congress can look to past occurrences of a similar magnitude to better understand the necessary mitigation and potential risks of a 10-year drought. This current drought has been referred to as the second Dust Bowl because of the danger it poses to California cropland that's essential for feeding. The 1930s Dust Bowl resulted in 50 million acres of land destroyed by dust storms and fires, and an estimated $1 billion in aid to support farmers who lost their jobs, lands, and even family members. The 1950s in the Great Plains and Northeast experienced an extreme drought where crop yields fell by half, putting the livelihoods of American farmers and consumers at risk. So far, the cost of this drought in U.S. history was actually in the 1980s, with $39 billion in reparation costs. The heat wave that came with the drought was also fairly deadly, with between 4,000 and 12,000 people killed in 1980, and another 4,800 to 17,000 casualties in 1988 to 89. The death toll was quite high due to wildfires that swept the nation, destroying homes, forests, and farms alike. The Southeast in the 1990s saw an extreme drought that caused between $1 and $3 billion in damage to cropland, and 17 people died from the heat wave. The mitigation that was lacking in all these past occurrences included poor soil management and water conservation regulation, and failing to prepare and protect the population from deadly wildfire. From these past droughts that destroyed the U.S. economy, land, and people, one would think that Congress could learn from these mistakes made in mitigation and become familiar with the potential risks of a severe long-term drought. So the cost-benefit analysis shows the modes of mitigation possible when dealing with a severe drought, how much it will cost the United States government to implement that mitigation, and what the benefit will be in terms of dollars spent on damaged lands, homes, and displaced people, and number of casualties. The California drought of 2012 cost over $50 million and killed 123 people, and if this drought is to continue for another 10 years, the cost could reach as high as $500 million in California alone, with over 1,000 deaths. The drought also cost the U.S. economy between $75 and $150 billion in lost revenue from crop failures. Over 10 years, this could amount to $1.5 trillion. The drought of 2014, California is estimated to reach $5 billion in lost revenue for the farming industry, and if this persists for 10 years, it could reach $50 billion. Preparing for a drought includes water conservation, increasing water storage, crop management, fire safety, and insurance. This could range from $50 to $100 million, depending on when it is implemented and how much construction for water storage is required in each state. Being properly prepared could significantly reduce the number of dead or injured because they would not be directly exposed to wildfires. Damage to crops will still be significant with a lack of rain, but proper water conservation could be the U.S. done. It is not possible to stop a drought from occurring altogether, of course, but the available mitigation for protecting against droughts focuses on enhancing and protecting the current water supply, quantity, and quality through strict regulation. When implemented with considerable foresight, these practices could be very valuable for the cost. Warning and response are last-minute modes of mitigation that include evacuation strategies and providing medical assistance for displaced persons. This could be very expensive, from $1 billion in aid, such as occurred with the Dust Bowl, to up to $5 million. Casualties are very high because of the size of the response teams cannot obviously care for an estimated 70 million people who would be affected by this drought. Damage is astronomical because it is too late to save many of the croplands that have already been laid to waste. Recovery and reconstruction will be by far the most costly modes of mitigation because they account for subsidies to farmers to replant their crops, which the government will need to provide rather than risk a nationwide famine. This includes making up for the entire lost revenues in the economy, plus extra needed to revamp and regulate the water distribution and conservation systems. Again, casualties are very high in this last-minute mode of mitigation, and damage is devastating. And now Mary will discuss some more specific solutions. The side effects of the drought varies from spontaneous forest fires, insect infestation, disease, loss of energy production, economic deterioration, the health problems associated with poor air quality, and lack of sanitation. In California alone, a surprising 183 communities rely solely on groundwater for drinking purposes. In the case of a drought, there is less water available to dilute contaminants like oil leakages, dust deposits, industrial chemicals, fertilizers, and bodily waste from groundwater. So these people are drinking a higher concentration of contaminants than they usually do, and they're getting sick from it. The California state government has assisted approximately 30 of these communities in improving their water filtration systems. Other states should take California's lead and ensure functionality of filtration systems within every state prior to the mega drought. Disease is also a common health concern associated with drought. Rivers, streams, and lakes dry up to the point in which they sit as large stagnant pools, attracting infestations of mosquitoes that carry disease. In addition to disease and water contamination, dust deposits and smoke from spontaneous forest fires generate poor air quality, affecting people with asthma and causing potential silicosis. Tree thinning in certain areas can prevent the spread of forest fires, decreasing the amount of smoke. Effective methods to minimize dust that do not require water treatment are installing permanent vegetation to highly erosive areas and applying crushed stone or topsoil in areas in which vegetation is not possible. Groundwater collection attributes to about 30 to 46% of California's total water supply, depending on the wet or dry years. This is not enough considering that groundwater, as opposed to surface water, becomes the, the most important resource in a drought. California's water reserves collect approximately 3 to 6 years worth of water storage, but the mega drought is projected to last at least 10 years. The management of California's aquifers is essential in preparation for a 10-year drought. There has been concern regarding deficiency in energy supply during the mega drought. About 14.5% of California's energy supply relies on hydroelectric power, and 69.5% of this power is produced in-state. Can you do the diagram to see what I'm talking about? California would lose only 10.08% of this total energy supply if it chose not to utilize hydroelectric power at all in preparation for a drought. Water supply typically used for hydropower production can be redirected to the drought effort and replaced with solar or wind energy. This is one action that can be taken by many other states throughout the U.S. California uses about 82 MFA, which stands for a million acre feet, which is approximately 26.7 trillion gallons of water per year. The California state government currently allocates 41.5% of the water to agriculture and farming, and 10% for urban water use, and 47.6% to meet environmental preservation standards. Maintaining the state's agriculture is important in maintaining job employment, food production, the country's commerce, as California's agriculture contributes greatly to the entire nation. Because it would be difficult to modify water allocation of agricultural functions and environmental regulations, the main focus in the case of a drought would be to reevaluate our use of residential water. Together, Californians use about 53%, as depicted in this diagram to the right, which is about 4.26 billion gallons of water per day of the water allocated to urban use for outdoor landscape purposes. The remaining 47%, which is 3.7 billion gallons of water per day of urban water, is used for indoor household purposes. If California alone was able to cut back on outdoor water usage in preparation for the drought, then this supply could accumulate to 4.77 MFA per year, towards storage for the dry season. Again, California's water reservoirs currently hold enough water to supply for 3 to 6 years of drought, which is not enough for the 10-year projected mega drought. If everyone cut back on outdoor residential usage for 5 years, the supply could be repurposed to support indoor residential needs for 5 more years in the dry season. We would also encourage members of the community to build their own rainwater catchment cisterns to collect water during the wet seasons prior to the drought. In the case of forest fires caused by drought, evacuation routes must be thought of in correspondence to specific areas. But in the case of a long-term drought, there will be more warning and more time to evacuate people. Preparation should be made because a mega drought is indeed very likely. The hardest hit communities in California and in Texas should be evacuated first. Evacuation can ripple out in stages from this location, as you can see in this map of the United States. We would start from here and then go outward. Public transportation methods such as buses should be utilized in order to remove people who do not have their own cars. Hotels along major routes should be notified and specific travel itineraries could be set up for communities. Neighborhoods should be evacuated in sections to avoid traffic jams. For the general population, investing in functional water filtration systems, reassessing residential water use, improving air quality, and enlarging aquifers will minimize the side effects caused by a drought. The effects of a drought are extremely severe, but with the right resources, recovery is possible. It is crucial that we plan ahead and create these resources as soon as possible. Another plan of action we can take is to establish meal sites in various areas where people can go to get food, which will be hard to get fresh during the drought and will no doubt leave many people in hunger. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is already working with the California Department of Education to expand the number of meal sites, but this should be furthered to include other places outside of California that are vulnerable to droughts. In addition, emergency water assistance grants from the U.S. Department of Agriculture currently aim to help rural communities obtain and maintain water sources of adequate quantity and quality should be expanded upon to reach more people outside of the small communities. It may not seem like it right now, but when we can get up and go to a nearby water station and get a drink. But water is valuable and precious. In order to prepare ourselves for the worst, preparing alternative sources to water is a must. By investing our time and money in these resources, we can protect the people that we love from the extreme effects of a drought. Thank you, Congressman, for your time and attention.